Great. Thank you so much, Matt. Thanks to FirstMark and Data Driven and ADP. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Sarah Nagy. I am the founder and CEO of Seek AI, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Seek and what we do. So Seek is building a natural language interface for data. It's a platform that anyone in an organization can use to simply ask the questions that they normally ask to the data team in natural language, and Seek will do the calculations for them, utilizing the data warehouse to get them the data they need fast. I'd like to talk a little bit about how Seek came to be. So my background is with data, working with data as a data scientist and a quant for a very long time. I've lived in New York for over 11 years. I started out on Wall Street doing algorithmic trading for a few years at a firm called ITG, led data teams at a couple B2B SaaS startups, and then led a data team at Citadel. And pretty much everywhere I worked, I'd have the same problem where I would be wanting to focus on my projects, but just be constantly interrupted by less technical people kind of coming up to me and asking me questions all the time. Hey, Sarah, can you help me get this data? I think there's a really funny meme, I don't know if anyone's seen, hey, can you help me pull this data real quick? And then, the result is select star from table that just conveniently exists, or whatever it is. So I get these kind of questions all the time. And, it's just a big problem because I had actual projects that I wanted to be working on that I just couldn't get to. And, if the questions piled up, it would just take a really long time to get back to the people asking the questions. And so, I kept experiencing this problem. And then one day I went on Hacker News, and this was in 2020 when GPT-3 came out. And on the front page, I saw GPT-3, and the thing that really stood out to me was it could write SQL and write Python. And I just saw that, and immediately was like, okay, this is going to help solve a lot of these problems. So that was kind of the inspiration for Seek and how I set out to build it. We've been around for almost a year and a half. We're based in New York. We actually have an office in Soho and now another one in Cupertino, California. And we're about 16 people. So just to talk a little bit more about the problem that we're solving, it kind of starts with this type of question. You could call it an ad hoc question, for example. Say it's a customer success person saying, hey, data team, sorry to bug you again, but can you pull these stats on these customers that I think might be at risk of churning? And if they don't have access to the data, they don't know where it is already, which is the case for most customer success professionals, they kind of are stuck and have to just ask the data team. There's kind of no other way to get an answer to this, which is pretty crazy, right? The purpose of the modern data stack, if you really think about it, it's to give ROI to the business. That's why they call it business intelligence. So when I stopped to think about it, it was pretty crazy to me that it's just kind of blocked by a bunch of people that don't even want to be helping you. They want to be working on their own projects. And so just to describe the current workflow, which some of you may be familiar with if you work with data, it starts with pulling data from your Snowflake. Maybe you've written similar queries in the past and you kind of dig them up and copy and paste them. You might work with a tool like Jira where you open a ticket and fill it out. And you might want to visualize the results by taking them and putting them into Matplotlib or whatever it is that you're using. So this is a very manual workflow, but it is what most organizations use. And the problem with this is, once the question is ready, it might be too late. I've experienced this myself where, if questions pile up and you get back 1 month later, you're like, here's your data, but it's just been too long, and the business users had to make a decision that was not data-driven because they couldn't get the data that they needed in time. So this is just something that we see with our customers time and time again. And just to talk a little bit about how the Seek workflow works, we're providing a natural language interface that's designed to be just easy to use by business users. So our goal is to have there be no training required. You just go into Slack, ask the Slack bot, and plug into other tools that are commonly used by business users, and kind of provide a conversation to help them get to the question that they're trying to ask, and then query the data for them on the back end. So in this case, that same customer success manager could just ask a question to Seek and be able to get the data back much faster. So on the back end, this is where it gets pretty cool and where the generative AI comes in. A lot of people know generative AI for ChatGPT and querying unstructured data, meaning like it could be data from the web that's been learned and can be, printed out word by word. But the code generation use cases are really cool, and that's part of what we use on the back end. That's kind of, that was the inspiration for why we built this. I also think that something that's pretty interesting to talk about is how this is possible today. This is a snapshot of kind of what I was seeing in 2021 when I was just starting Seek. There is a coding evaluation data set called the Human Eval data set that measures performance of state-of-the-art AI models at solving coding questions. And so believe it or not, in 2020, the state-of-the-art model couldn't even solve a single question. It just skyrocketed. In 2021, the state-of-the-art model could answer 72.3% of all of the coding questions. And so this really is something that has changed a lot, and it's changed even more now. But by 2021, if you were thinking, what was the state of the art 2 years ago, it wouldn't have even, been working. And just to talk a little bit more about, how customers currently use Seek, we work with a mid-stage SaaS company that works with all sorts of CPG Fortune 100 companies. And we've learned something really interesting, which is these companies want to be shipping goods online, potentially. But sometimes they can't because of all the regulations, which are often stored in structured data sets. And so without somebody to answer a lot of questions around the regulations, it can be really difficult to determine, okay, which of these goods can we put on our website and ship? There's just so much data and so many products. It's really difficult to do this with just the existing data team. And so this is an example of something that can be automated. And if you can get these answers to which products that can be shipped in a fraction of the time, this is where you can unlock just potentially hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of just goods that you can now ship, which translates into GMV. Just to talk a little bit more about, other kind of things we've seen with our customers, questions can be answered much faster. So I think this is going to be true for all sorts of generative AI that helps developers and data analysts. But with Seek specifically, we're seeing a productivity increase in data analysts. Just being able to have questions answered faster. So that's one example of the ROI is the productivity. The other thing is we've helped customers answer thousands of questions. And that's another benefit is, once you kind of unlock the ability to ask questions, you might find yourself asking more than you currently do. And then the last one is, cutting down the time waiting. So I think one of the biggest visions for us is, actually help just get more ROI out of the modern data stack and help business users be able to ask just more questions that they want to be asking.
Cool, thank you. All right, I'll start with the first question and then I'll pass around the mic. Does this work on any kind of underlying analytics platform as long as you can push out SQL?
Yeah, so our focus is on cloud data warehouses and data teams that are using the modern data stack. Anything outside of that isn't as much of our focus, but with tools like Fivetran, there's a lot you can pull into the warehouse. So by focusing on the warehouse, there's a lot of data that we can query.
Yes, and so you push the query directly into Snowflake or Redshift?
Yeah, so Seek just sits on top of the data where it is. So we're sending queries into the data, but we're not, indexing the data or replicating it. Like we're not a database. We're just querying it where it is.
Okay, very cool. All right, are there questions over there?
So 2 questions, one around data governance and then another around defining what is the churn rate, right? Which I'm sure many of you have wondered what that is. So when it comes to a data governance standpoint, do you guys have the ability to limit the kinds of questions that people can ask or where they can pull data from? And then the second question is could you define or would it be possible for users to define hey, the churn rate for the company you work for is, this calculation, give me that from, these different segments of our customer base?
Yeah, so those are a couple of good questions. The first one about data governance, it's funny, every customer we talk to, especially now for some reason, asks us about that. Can you inherit roles from Snowflake, or can you block off certain types of people in the business from seeing certain types of data? So that was a really common feature request that we got. So yes, that is something that we have support for, based a lot on just feedback we heard. Yeah, and to your other point about kind of metrics and how businesses are defining metrics and how that gets queried by Seek. That was another reason we focus on the modern data stack, which includes dbt. Maybe just to go back, I don't know how many people here don't know what the modern data stack is, but it's the warehouse. Then you have the ingestion layer, which is Fivetran or Airbyte, whatever you're using to dump the data in the warehouse. Then you have the transformation layer, which is where you can define the metrics, so dbt, for example. Then you have the visualization layer, which is the BI tools like Looker or Tableau. So, that our focus is on automating a lot of the workflow with that whole stack to serve the business users. So, because of that, integrating with dbt is a really important piece of the product to us.
Hi. This is a really cool idea, really interesting. So with large language models that go and can go scan all of GitHub for indexing and go scan all of Stack Overflow and go and answer programming projects. I understand how that works. And, excuse me, this is a naive question, but how do you actually train your model to understand private code bases and private databases that are not exposed to these traditional training sets?
Yeah, so there's we work with large language models at our core, and so there are a lot of ways that you can expose these models to new data sets. One of the most common ways is fine-tuning. That's where you actually change the model weights themselves. Or there's other things you can do with few-shot learning, which is, if you think of the prompt in ChatGPT where you ask your question, you can change what you put into the prompt as well. So that's another place where you can add some context for the data. And between those two things, you can already do a lot to kind of teach these models about any sort of new data. Yeah.
All right, lots of questions. Good.
Hey, I think sounds like a really cool tool. I'd love to try it out. My question is just around like really custom tables and people's kind of like it's setups. Like a lot of the companies I've worked at, they have tables like users or accounts or like events, but also a lot of the tables are like T_A93 something, right? Something kind of really obscure. How do you deal with that and make sure you're actually retrieving the right table? Is there like a kind of middleware kind of interface where you can direct some of the queries?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I would say that's an area where we've put probably a lot more thought into this than, probably just a person off the street that might try to say like, oh, GPT-3, maybe not GPT-3, GPT 3.5 is so cool, let me try to like build an app in Bubble and connect to the API or whatever. We came across a lot of customers that had data that looked like that, and had to just figure out, okay, we need to do a lot more than just have kind of a basic model that says, oh, you have this column called XYZ or whatever it is. I'm just going to take the name of that column and try to just predict that it's going to answer this question. And this is kind of going back to the other question about training. Training the model to, learn more just about the data beyond the superficial, just face value of the columns. That's actually something that we worked really hard on. So yeah, that was a pretty common piece of feedback from a lot of our customers, actually.
All right, one last question.
Thanks for the talk. One thing that large language models are prone to by their nature is hallucination and the surrounding issues, which I would imagine if the model is not getting the SQL query right and then the results returned are incorrect, then presumably that's an issue. I'm curious how you're addressing this in your use of large language models here.
Yeah, that's a really kind of hot topic right now. The hallucination aspect is something that, what's interesting about our use case is it's a very low margin of error use case when you're querying data. Like, the stakes are high, you need to get the right data back to the business users, so there's no room for like, it's different from like a high schooler asking ChatGPT to write an essay, because the essay it gives is going to be like statistically the most likely essay that could be written, and so it's probably fine. But if you're asking a specific question about the data and you just get the most likely data back, it's like it's probably not enough. So I actually built the alpha of Seek as a solo founder starting out, when I was starting Seek around a year and a half ago. And it's funny because I was a data scientist, I kind of knew to build in guardrails even from the beginning, because I had this experience just when I had been a data scientist. We had these quote unquote self-serve tools that the business users were supposed to be using to just get the data themselves. But we kept finding they would see this data that was wrong, and they just didn't know it, so they would make decisions on it. And I come from the trading and investment world, so those can be very serious decisions that could potentially cost someone their job even. And so that was kind of a philosophy that we had from the beginning, to kind of put in this control flow and guardrails to help protect against just exposing the hallucinations directly to the business users.
All right, very cool. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks.